Professor Namyong Lee's commentary, long, Diagnosing the Scandal of Nomination Bribery in the Democratic Party's Seoul City Council Candidate Selection. The root of disease in Korean politics is not revealed on election day, but on nomination day. In particular, nominations for the Seoul Metropolitan Council are the starting point of local power and a gateway that can lead into national politics. When that gateway is contaminated by money, local autonomy is privatized, and democracy is left with nothing but form. The recently raised allegations of nomination money in the Democratic Party's Seoul City Council selection process go beyond a simple case of illegal political funding. They point to a structural corruption risk that simultaneously erodes intra-party democracy and the ethics of public office. Allegations must remain allegations, facts must remain facts, and everything must be sorted out through evidence and due process. But the moment this problem is ignored and dismissed as an individual deviation, the nomination process stops being a system and becomes a market. Once money captures nominations, policy and representation exit the stage, and fundraising capacity is disguised as political qualification. The next step, with few exceptions, is payback. Local councils exert influence over budgets, ordinances, audits, permits and approvals, private outsourcing, subsidies and various contracts. In Seoul alone, the total 2025 municipal budget has been presented at 145 trillion won. Categories directly linked to cash flows, subsidies and outsourcing, such as welfare, 17.4649 trillion won, and education and district support, 10.5431 trillion won, account for a large share of the budget. When this massive pool of public resources falls under the shadow of nomination transactions, residents immediately bear the costs of suspicion and inefficiency. Even by global standards, political corruption is the most expensive kind of corruption. A widely cited estimate introduced by the World Bank suggests that roughly USD 2.6 trillion, about 5% of global GDP, is lost to corruption each year. Corruption is not merely a moral issue. It destroys growth, investment confidence and tax trust. That is why nomination money is not noise inside a party, but a risk that corrodes the underlying structure of national competitiveness and urban competitiveness. International indicators also send a clear signal. In the 2024 Corruption Perceptions Index, Korea recorded 64 out of 100 and ranked 30th out of 180 countries. There has been improvement, but this is not a point for complacency. It should be read as pressure to move higher. If allegations surrounding nominations and political money repeatedly surface, this score can easily slide backward. More lethal still is the collapse of trust. In an OECD trust survey, Korea fell into the low range with 20% trust in political parties and 21% trust in the National Assembly. Civil servants, local governments, and the judiciary tend to register relatively higher trust. But when parties, politics' point of entry, hit the floor, the entire administrative system is shaken. The moment nominations begin to smell like money, voters drift toward "they're all the same," and that cynicism dries up democracy's fuel. Domestic statistics also show warning lights. In the 2023 Public Sector Integrity Assessment, the overall score declined year on year to 80.5, and the internal corruption experience rate reported by employees was described as far higher than the corruption experience rate reported by external complainants. Corruption experience ratios were noted as higher in core local government functions, and there were continued observations that subsidy-related areas showed a larger increase in corruption experience. Hundreds of cases were reportedly counted as penalty incidents, and by type, misuse or embezzlement of public funds, and the receipt of money or valuables accounted for large shares. The numbers already explain why local council nominations become dangerous when fused with the temptation of money. Nomination money is not an individual deviation. The moment money concentrates on a small group holding nomination power and begins to function as a criterion for selecting candidates, nominations turn from evaluation into transaction. Voters' options are distorted, and politics after election becomes governed by a logic of recoupment. If it leads to distorted budget allocation, biased outsourcing towards specific firms or groups, tilted subsidies, and a hollowing out of audits, residents suffer both declining service quality and tax leakage. The fact that public procurement occupies a significant share of government spending across OECD countries means that contaminated nominations can quickly turn into the temptation of contracts and outsourcing. Korea is sometimes presented as having relatively high public procurement spending as a share of GDP, which implies that the sheer size of the public spending pool itself becomes a structural risk factor. This matter must not be reduced to a factional attack, but neither should it be wrapped in neutral language that blurs the substance. If the Democratic Party fails to clearly verify the nomination money allegations raised in the Seoul City Council selection process, that becomes evidence of failure to self-correct. A party is not a private club, it is an organization that performs a public function, and nominations are the starting point of allocating public power. Opacity at this point is a betrayal of democracy. The solution is clear. This is not reform by rhetoric, but reform of institutions that leave numbers and records behind. First, a permanent nomination bribery reporting center must be established. A temporary window that moves only during election season cannot catch corruption. It must be built on anonymous reporting, legal protection for whistleblowers, and a system that can securely receive and preserve account flows, messenger logs, and digital evidence. In an environment where reporting leads to retaliation, no truth will ever surface. Second, the entire nomination process must be made transparent. Nomination criteria and scoring, principles for composing screening committees, conflict of interest safeguards, and a summary of evaluation outcomes must be disclosed on a standing basis to the extent possible. Closed-door nominations are the soil in which nomination money grows. Records and disclosure are prevention, and prevention is the cheapest reform. Third, total political expulsion of those involved must be the principle. Candidates, brokers, and nomination power holders who tolerated, aided, or abetted nomination money must lose political qualification, separate from criminal punishment. As long as token penalties and the practice of returning after time passes remain, nomination money will not disappear. Public office is not an object of transaction. It is a responsibility delegated by the people. Fourth, the independence of oversight and enforcement must be strengthened. Political money monitoring and election administration must be separated from politics, and real investigative authority and access to materials must be guaranteed. A model that loads every burden onto a single institution has limits. Cross-verification and data sharing with civil society, the media, and academia must be institutionalized to reduce blind spots. In particular, procurement, outsourcing, and subsidies involve long and complex money paths, so an always-on monitoring system using open data standards is effective. If Korea actively adopts the international trend of standardizing and disclosing end-to-end contract data, it can cut the nomination budget contract linkage not through after-the-fact investigations, but through early detection. Fifth, party responsibility must be made real. Nomination money is not only an individual crime, it is a failure of party governance. When management failures are confirmed, effective sanctions, such as reductions in public subsidies, restrictions on nomination authority, or mandatory process reforms, must follow. This is not an infringement of party autonomy, it is a mechanism for restoring democracy. The National Assembly must refine laws and institutions so that these principles actually work. Politics collapses if it follows the path of money. Seoul City Council nominations are the starting point of power that directly affects residents' lives. If that starting point is contaminated, all subsequent policies and administration cannot escape the shadow of suspicion. The Democratic Party must choose frontal diagnosis, not defensive posture, as a turning point in this case. Silence is interpreted not as neutrality, but as complicity. Let me be clear. Nomination money is not a custom. It is a crime. It is not an object of compromise. It is an object of conquest. Only when these 5 measures operate simultaneously, permanent reporting, transparent nominations, total expulsion of those involved, independent oversight, and real party accountability, can politics be restored. The reason for diagnosing the scandal of nomination money in the Democratic Party's Seoul City Council selection is not to attack, but to save Korean democracy. Thank you for watching Professor Namyong Lee's commentary. Long